Hello, and welcome to our fourth podcast. We are here today with Food Plant Engineering. They are a silver sponsor of the Alternative Protein Show. This is Diana and Alex from BrandFirst.
Hi.
And we are the official design partner of the Alternative Protein Show. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a creative agency located in New Jersey, and we specialize in branding.
Food Plant Engineering. You'd be surprised to hear all the interesting connections that this company puts together to achieve a backbone for the manufacturing of foodstuff on a commercial level. They're going headlong into the alternative protein landscape, offering their services to help companies scale up their innovations. Providing the needed platform and manufacturing base will allow for this budding industry to become fully realized. In short, Food Plant Engineering plans out and fully executes facilities needed for the customization of new products, technologies, and food technology in particular. I think we're going to learn a lot today.
I agree. It's nice to have you guys here.
How are all of you today?
We're good. Good. Thanks. How are you?
We're very good.
Good.
So can you just introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Mark Redmond. I am the president of Food Plant Engineering.
My name is Emily Deersing, and I'm a process engineer.
I'm Jennifer Redmond, and I'm marketing director.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us.
So how did you get involved with the Alternative Protein Show?
We have done some projects in the alternative protein industry, and one of our clients asked us if we would be interested in attending the show, and we didn't know that much about it, and she was telling us more information of what the show was about, and that's basically how we got involved.
Excellent.
Nice.
So would you be able to tell us, give us examples of clients that you work with in the alternative protein landscape?
Yeah, so the types of clients we work with are on the plant-based side of the alternative protein landscape. And the types of clients, a lot of the people we work with are confidential. This is a very new and growing industry, so they don't like to have their names promoted. But the types of, it's all plant-based for alternative meat and fish type substitutes, basically.
Gotcha. Okay. And really what you do, so you specialize in food plant design and construction, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So tell us about some of the things that you might do for, a new company in this industry, and what kind of challenges you foresee along the way.
Yeah, so our company, we work in kind of three different steps of what we would like to call planning, designing, and building. So in the planning phase, we would work to help understand the client's needs, address a bunch of, various requirements for their process, as well as helping select equipment if they don't have equipment in mind, and really getting a conceptual design together for their facility. And then from there, if they choose to move into the design and build phase, we'd actually follow through with all of the engineering design, the architectural design, through permitting, and we can even manage the construction management of the building itself. So every project is a little bit different. And then for this industry specifically, we kind of see a lot of the major challenges occurring in the scale-up process. With cell growth specifically, a lot of those processes are very expensive and they require the bioreactors. So as they begin to scale up that process to more of an industrial-sized facility, that could just get very costly in terms of the technologies to create it, as well as requiring a lot of time to really optimize all of the parameters to make that product.
Yeah, so what Emily's talking about is on the both in the cell-based and in the plant-based side. The scale-up is always the challenge, because most of these producers are starting off in a lab type environment or a small production pilot plant environment. and they're making it kind of to test the market for their products and work out the kinks, because none of these products have been made. They're all new in terms of how they're being produced. A lot of the equipment might be standard equipment that's been used in the food industry, but it needs to be applied in a different manner. So trying to take it from the concept stage, if you will, from a kitchen, a kitchen type operation or a lab type operation, up to the volumes you need to produce it for consumption is the challenge.
Right. So it's kind of like a new origami, so to say, in that a lot of these companies that are innovating new proteins really can't necessarily say to a co-packer, for example, hey, can you guys handle this? Because it's such proprietary new technology that you need to figure out how to scale them up in the first place. So they might as well start with investment as to have their own facility custom made to handle their specific needs. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. In order to have, and this happens a lot in the food industry, is a lot of people come up with new product lines, and instead of investing in the facilities initially, they'll find a co-packer or co-manufacturer to produce the product for them to their recipes, to their formulations. But the problem in this industry is things are so proprietary and so innovative that they're very reluctant to allow somebody else to have access to that, as well as because it's very specific in how it's being produced. It's difficult sometimes for a co-manufacturer to have maybe the equipment or the processes to even be able to do this at that stage.
Right. So that's fascinating because I know that the science itself is so refined and it's kind of fledgling, right? So it's so new that even having the idea of turning it into something that's a product that people can buy, there's just so much between the innovation and actually carrying it through, like you said, scaling up. And I mean, that said, it's kind of like no matter what you do, even the terminology itself is still new. For example, I understand you used bioreactor as terminology. We've kind of been told, and we quite agree, that bioreactor is something that the public generally is going to think nuclear, I think, is what they're going to think. And it's obviously not that in fact, right? It's more akin to a brewery's brew tank.
Like a fermentation tank. Or
something. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because a lot of so the food industry also is a regulated industry by the government. So you've got two different branches of the government that regulate our food supply. You've got the USDA, which has been historically the animal-based, regulatory body, and then you've got the FDA, which handles the plant-based type products. So, and they've always had, there's two separate divisions. With the newer technologies, such as the cell-based company with bioreactors, that's more of an FDA in a sense of a medical type facility versus, or a operation versus a food-based operation. So we have issues now with even how it gets labeled and how it gets, who's going to look over it, so to speak. Is it the USDA or is it the FDA? So there's confusion even amongst the government on how this is going to be labeled and regulated going forward.
Right. I understand that they more recently did have a meeting where they agreed to try to get along.
Yes. I understand that's what they had a meeting for.
Yeah. So from what I've learned right now, we're kind of on the cusp of, cellular agriculture is so new. So let's put that aside for a moment. Plant-based, right? In order to approximate the texture and taste of animal proteins, plant-based, like such as Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger, as good examples, they're really going after that taste and texture. And they're doing it like Impossible has like heme, which they've synthesized from I believe it's from soy-based heme, which is actually a product that is, the result of what makes the iron in blood taste the way that it does, which actually is a definitive aspect of why meat tastes the way that it does. So they've approximated that in plant-based using the soy plant side. and synthesizing heme. Whereas Beyond Burger is doing something that's not as much of a GMO solution, but more of a really trying to get the texture and taste approximate to meat. Okay. So there's those two different things that are going on. But beyond that, there's great potential within the industry to synthesize different plant-based proteins, such as looking and doing research on the chickpea, looking and doing research on other beans. I mean, even black beans or lentils or all kinds of undiscovered things. So I just was wondering if you had anything input about that.
Meat and like for instance, beef and pork and chicken and fish, they all have physical properties and physical characteristics to the cells of those products. Whereas obviously a plant does not always have the same characteristics. So what's happening in the food industry is in order to try to not replicate, but make it a similar uh, experience when you're consuming the food, have the same feel, mouth texture in your mouth, the same feel, the same organoleptic properties, the same sense, the same savory senses that the industry is trying to figure out ways to replicate that. So, for instance, let's say take fish for example. If you have a fillet of fish and you put it on a sandwich, it's got flakiness to it. It's got properties that make it look and feel like fish. Whereas plant-based would be something that would be ground up and put into a patty, but it doesn't have that same kind of a look and feel to it. And people would, when they eat a product like that, they want to have that same experience. And that's what like Beyond Burger's done and some of those others. And some of the newer technologies with, like you said, with chickpeas and some of these others that are able to replicate more of the physical sense structure of the cell of the food product versus just the and also the taste, to have that same taste, because your taste buds, food is, as you eat food, the taste buds go through different changes and experiences as different parts of the flavor come out of the food. So that's where they're trying to replicate a lot of the research and like new technology is heading.
Right. And that brings up a question actually that as you were speaking, I just started to wonder, when these companies come to you to develop a food plant, how much do you need to know about their processes and how much do they tell you and reveal to you in order to set up the food plants?
And so a lot of what we do on our end is we're more on the, I'm going to say, the actual scale up side versus the innovative side of how to produce this. They will produce it in a small scale in the lab and figure out the food science behind it, if you will. We look more into the mechanics of how do we take that food science and produce it on a larger scale. What types of equipment are available in the industry, or how can it be modified? What can it be used? As an example, they would make the base product, but then you've got to figure out how to take that and form it into something that the consumer is going to want to purchase. How is it going to be packaged in a way the consumer wants to buy it? So you can it's like if you make something in your kitchen and you mix it up in a bowl, then what do you do with it? We kind of take it from the bowl into the rest of the world, so to speak.
I
Sure.
gotcha. Okay.
In your experience with plant-based proteins, are there ones that are easier to work with than others?
So because we don't do too much with the specific product itself, in our opinion, they're actually all pretty similar because we'll be taking it from the equipment manufacturing side. So when it comes to the equipment design, we would work with those manufacturers to try to, as Mark had said before, scale up to get the ultimate product that they're looking for. So from our end, we'd be most concerned probably around the ingredient properties to make sure that we have the proper storage conditions, proper labeling requirements from a food safety perspective, to make sure that one day that they can comply with all of the government regulations that they're going to need to continue to manufacture in a safe manner for consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. But wouldn't it be something like if you were going to, let's just say you guys are specialists in pizza ovens, right? It certainly the pizza parlor is going to use whatever dough they want to use, right? Now, if they're going to use just a regular dough, they're going to get what they expect. But if they start messing around with the kind of dough they're using, the temperature of the oven might not accommodate that in the way that would be most optimal. So you do have a great effect on understanding what the ingredients are to scale up with and create the technology that allows that scaling up to happen. That's kind of like what I meant by the question as to whether or not there was one that was easier than another. But I suppose that's the user end. That's their problem. Is that
Well,
kind of what you're saying?
yes, but also as an example, we had a project where the owner was doing a vegan, gluten-free vegan chocolate. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that was being applied to well, I say it's a vegan chocolate being applied to a gluten-free tart. So the machines that apply the chocolate to the surface of the product are you set up for milk-based chocolates. So in order to try to run that, it runs a little differently than it does with a vegan-based chocolate. So the equipment, while it's set up to be the same type of food product, the properties are different for the product that's going into it. So we have to look at how to figure out how to make the adjustments and the modifications to it at that point.
Sure, right.
Okay.
So the chocolate being vegan, it doesn't have the same temperature requirements necessarily as a dairy-based chocolate.
Correct.
Exactly.
Like
And that's
a-
also where a lot of our relationships with our equipment vendors come in, because a lot of our clients can send them unmarked bags. So the equipment person itself does not have to know all the ins and outs of every single ingredient in the product, but they can send them some sort of ingredient mix and then work and be on site with that equipment vendor to make their product to then prove out those concepts if they haven't purchased equipment for their own facility. The equipment vendors really do try to do their best to make sure that their equipment's going to be applicable for whatever the client's making.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, so then you're setting yourself apart from the equipment vendor.
Yes, yes. So we can coordinate with them, and we definitely keep in close contact in order to ensure that we have everything we need from an engineering standpoint, being rate information and utilities information. And then we'll coordinate that with the equipment installation in the building itself.
Yeah, our space in the food industry is we're not manufacturers or designers of the specific equipment. We integrate the equipment into the facility and into the plant and get in basically plug all the pieces together so they all work together as one system.
Right. So you're logistics experts.
Correct.
So within logistics, that is timing, and it's structured timing, especially to make sure that from one process goes to the next, that there's all of the required checks that need to be in place in order to not miss a step or mess something up.
Correct, yes. So whether that's from the material handling side, from getting something from a warehouse to the processing area, making sure that the flow of the plant works so you can get everything out the door on the other side of the facility, or sometimes the same side of the facility, depending on how it's set up.
Gotcha.
Right. So you play drum and bass in the food band.
Yes. Yeah, you've got the supply chain, if you will, inside the food plant. Everything has to work in sync. If you can't feed the machine with the right amount of material, if you can't take it away from the machine, if you can't have one machine supplying to the next machine properly in the right amount of space, in a hygienic, sanitary environment, because the food a lot of times is exposed to the environment, then that's kind of our role in making sure everything works together.
I'm sure it takes a lot of preparation and timing, and I'm sure that it's different for different clients of yours. But what would be like a typical, I don't know, timeline for really for creating a facility?
It can vary greatly depending on the needs of each client, but a typical timeline, once they come to us and have a need, um, we can work with them for say can be anywhere from 2 months to say 6 months, and working out the plan. In other words, what it is they want to kind of a roadmap of how they're going to be able to scale up and produce what they want to produce. So that involves putting together, a floor plan with equipment on it, basically that shows you the whole process flow through a facility or a food plant. But once you get past that kind of roadmap of how the process and how the food's going to be manufactured, then we have to actually implement the design or the all the little nuts and bolts, if you will, how the facility is going to be built, and that can take anywhere from another 4 months to 6 months, and then to build the facility can take another year. So typically, we always tell everyone that a typical start to finish project is about 18 months. Sometimes they can be done in 12, but it's typically 18 months once they come to us.
Is there ever any overlap between like different, clients possibly who have a similar, manufacturing process? Can you kind of, utilize some of the blueprints, for
Well,
instance?
we don't. Yeah, it's that's a really good question, and a lot of folks want to say maybe they found a food plant that's for sale somewhere, and they think they can utilize that because it's a food plant.
Right.
I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and everyone is different. They all use similar components,
Right.
similar pieces, but they're all arranged completely differently. It's like a puzzle. If you buy a puzzle, of a landscape of the Rocky Mountains, and you buy a puzzle of the Grand Canyon, you're gonna it's a bunch of pieces, but they're all put together in differently. So,
Very true. Okay, that makes sense.
but we'll see similar. For instance, ovens. You might see similar ovens across the industries that utilize uh, different technologies, but they may be used in different plants. So you go to a bakery or a vegetable processing or whatever. There's different pieces of equipment, but it's used in different industries. So it's not just specific to that particular food product. It's used in different ways.
So it sounds to me as if you're kind of also beholden to regulation. So FDA and USDA communicating and sort of volunteering their positions, and then finally, like the legislation that kind of codifies that is something that really sets the tone for how it is that you can build what you're trying to build for new companies like that.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a couple. There's the regulatory environment, the government, and that's affects everything from food labeling to how you're going to clean your facility. Um, but there's also third-party auditing agencies out there now that are part of what's called the Global Food Safety Initiative, and they are not government regulations, but a lot of the end consumers, not the customers, but the grocery store chains, the restaurants, the hotels that buy food products will utilize some of these third party regulations, or if you will, auditing to verify that the food plant is set up in to produce food in a sanitary manner. So there's kind of two different aspects, two different things you have to look at. One is the government regulations that like you said, codify the how food is going to get produced, but there's also the third party standards, which is almost the end buyer is going to look at as well.
And what about environmental impact, right? Have there been any changes in the way that you build out facilities as a result of, a greater emphasis on environmental impact?
And that's a very good question. So obviously the food plants by their nature use a lot of water most of the time. There's a lot of water for cleanup. There's a lot of water for use in the product. There's just and water that gets put down the drain. So any water that's being used, if it's both costly to treat, to put into the facility, it's also costly to treat and dump back out. So there's a lot of ways to reduce the water consumption in a plant and reduce your impact on your wastewater. Same way with air. There's a lot of of air that gets discharged in different processes. So in cooking and in heating and filtration. So a lot of that air that is discharged from a facility needs to be filtered and cleaned. Uh, so there's a lot of different things that come into play. Your energy consumption, trying to reduce the carbon footprint, trying to make these facilities more energy efficient. And that's where a lot of the equipment selection comes into play, and a lot of ways you can build these facilities. So.
It's an interesting phenomenon if you see, like on Shark Tank, for example, more recently, and it could have been a repeat I was watching, there was a company that had taken on manufacturing their sauce by themselves. And they didn't want to go to a co-packer because they felt that a co-packer was going to, in essence, take away the home style effect of what they were doing, the control that they wanted, all of that. It's akin to when you're a child and you're digging a hole in the sand and you think that you're going to get to China. Well, actually, if you really wanted to get to China, you're going to have to understand what's happening around you as well as the process of digging. If you want to move a larger truck in there to dig, right, this is where you guys come into play because you understand the size requirements, the navigation, the logistics to actually get to China. Have you ever yet done that for a client?
Well, I don't know if we've gotten to China yet, but we've gotten halfway there probably.
Yeah, right.
No, that's a great question, and it's interesting because one of our clients came over, immigrated from another country, and basically bought a little corner bakery operation and has grown it to be a very large scale maker of fine pastries and croissants and muffins. So that scale up is an amazing journey to watch. But the trick is to be able to the challenge is when you're looking at, let's say you've got a large like you said, you're trying to dig a hole. Okay, we want to dig a very big hole, but the hole needs to start off with we can buy a big huge steam shovel and go out and start digging the hole, but the hole doesn't need to be that big at first. So we're going to buy a shovel. Well, the shovel is going to take us some time, but then we're going to buy 2 more shovels. We're going to buy 3 more shovels. Pretty soon we owned 100 shovels. Well, maybe we could have bought a little steam shovel for that. So it's kind of the question is, do you want that you buy a big piece of equipment first to dig that hole, or do you want to buy a bunch of little ones? So the answer usually is somewhere in between. You don't want to get too far off and get too far ahead of yourself because it's very costly to do that. So you have to be able to buy the equipment on the right scale, and sometimes it means that you're going to have to move your operation. You're going to be able to do it. You can't make it 100 times faster or 100 times bigger in the same facility. You're going to have to start off, look at the projections for the next few years, how much you can produce, and then once you get to that point, relocate or add on to your facility.
Sure. So you're essentially specialists in optimization.
Correct. Yep.
Because somebody could end up buying all these little shovels, and they're not only they're wasting their time, but they're also wasting their resources, their money. So it's really a solution based, to exactly what their objective is.
It's all about looking long term and kind of knowing where you're going to end up, right? And not kind of going too far, to your point, with too big a projection.
Yeah, and so what happens a lot of times is what we do, and this is the problem they have with scale up in the industry is that sometimes you can't always project what your growth curve is going to look like, and we can design a facility that accommodates maybe the backbone, if you will, the infrastructure, the support system is large enough to handle adding more modules, but you don't put all the modules in at first. So that way you've got the system to plug it in, if you will, but you're not buying all the modules, but you still have the place to plug in the module.
Right, you're still planning for it.
Correct.
Do you also build facilities for co-packers?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Co-packers have they're a good example of flexibility because they do not have a particular product line. They have usually a process base. They're going to produce certain types of food ingredients or food types of food products, but they're not going to have their own brand, if you will. So, but they need to be flexible, because if somebody comes to them and needs to produce something, they need to be able to accommodate that need.
Yeah,
Right.
because they're administering essentially for different problems. The solution's not going to always fit, but you try to make them as able to adapt to those requirements per customer.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Have you worked on any facilities that require completely new ways of approaching the manufacture of food?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily completely new ways. It's a different angle or a different twist on it. There's there's usually what happens is they've got a product that they're producing, and there's usually a unique part of that process that is different from anyone else. So when you get to the certain step of the process, it becomes something that's very, it puts it kind of why their product is unique and different in itself. So that part of the process is different. But in terms of, completely from start to finish,
Right.
not very often.
Do you produce facilities for beverages as well?
Yeah, we're not. That's one thing we do not have a large presence in the market, is in the beverage market. There's a lot of beverages that have been out, innovative. Kombucha, for instance. We've talked to a few people in that industry, and they have the issue of again looking to the future in terms of how large they want to be. A lot of times they have trouble with the scale up because they've been made, on a homegrown basis, and they don't think of it from a true food manufacturing perspective.
Yeah, that's one I was actually, that was another thing that I was going to wonder, because that really, making kombucha is essentially a really, personal experience for a lot of people. They dabble in it. They have this thing called a SCOBY, and they are using that as the medium to grow the bacteria to make the tea. But it's so very important that when that's done, that they are keeping the right environment, because it can actually become, a toxic thing. So, I was imagining that, somebody that has as much experience as you guys do, when you're dealing with fungus, or you're dealing with yogurts, or you're dealing with anything that requires the right kind of temperature, that's something that you plan for. Have you ever done like a manufacturing facility for yogurt, or something that's live culture?
Yeah. So the anything that's a live culture or fermented type product, we have to deal with. That's a difficult situation, in the sense that they can experience what's called a bacteriophage problem, where there is a competing bacteria that is not part of their fermentation bacteria, that will fight basically for environmental control, and it will stop the fermentation process. So we actually have done some work in the cheese and other fermented product industries, where the air, the environment, and the air has to be controlled specifically to prevent what they call the bacteriophage going in and basically stopping the fermentation process. And we did a kombucha facility, we did a sourdough facility, which is also a fermented bread product, that was next to a kombucha facility. We did not work on the kombucha facility. We shared utilities with them, so we had to work with their staff. But there was a great concern over the basically the sourdough and the kombucha mixing with each other, and who knows, creating some alien beast. I don't know, but it was going to be. It was each was worried about the other affecting one another, so that had to be dealt with.
Yeah. Right.
Sure.
I imagine.
Especially like wild yeast, if you're making bread, I know that it's a real gamble, because somebody could have baked there before and used a commercial strain. So if you're doing wild yeast, you really have to have that, buttoned down. I can imagine being afraid of other people's yeast for more than one reason. What's interesting is that you guys have so much experience in doing this for so long for different kinds of food. And yet, here we are, kind of catering to an industry that is so new with the alternative protein landscape. Are there any, for instance, like, let's talk about cellular agriculture. I know that you might not have, worked with them as a client yet, But, is there anything that you foresee as a problem with working with cellular agriculture that would be something that you have to innovate?
Well, I think with any new technology that's brought into the marketplace, there's always the unknowns of how it's going to be what issues are going to become in the manufacturing process or the scale up process that you just don't know about, and how things are going to be affected.
Yeah.
Let's talk about environmental. Are there things that are going to be discharged into the environment that could be a concern as a byproduct of this into the wastewater stream or the air stream? Things that were unforeseen as it gets scaled up that didn't show up in the lab environment. Are there things in the manufacturing process that might cause issues? So whenever there's, when you're dealing with food, every manufacturer they want to reduce their waste in terms of the actual product itself. They want to what they call increase their yield. So they don't want to throw any potential food down the drain, so to speak. They want to be able to utilize every piece of that process. So sometimes there's byproducts that get, and let's talk about just in general in cheese manufacturing. If you're going to make cheese, none of us on a plant-based, but you have to deal with the way that it's a byproduct, and the whey has to be dealt with, and you don't want to just throw it down the drain and dispose of it. So that's where the whey protein industry has grown as a byproduct. So there might be other products like that as you're manufacturing in a cellular-based environment or fermented type product, that there may be byproducts that get put off that we have to deal with, and maybe there's another use for those. So there's a lot of those unknowns.
Sure. It's interesting because byproducts have now kind of been championed by a lot of different companies working to, reuse what has been discarded, as a general practice, which is really, not only is it fascinating, but it makes complete sense. So you really don't know what those byproducts are going to be, obviously, until you have to figure out what you're working with. That said, in terms of cellular agriculture and the way in which something is grown, would you surmise that it's still going to need a bioreactor as the main device in order to help it scale up?
I think that'll just depend as technology continues to change. I mean, we've been talking about internally about how easier it's already began to make the product throughout the past couple of years. I mean, I think we were reading that cellular agriculture, some of the first pounds of meat that they were making ended up costing $15,000. Whereas more recently, we've already brought it down to about $2,500 a pound. So I think it'll be interesting as science and technology begins to change, that we can't really foresee what might happen. I'd imagine it's going to continue to become easier and easier, and maybe bioreactors aren't the correct technology to do that. But we'll see.
One thing that I sort of came up in the news is printing food.
Yeah.
Right. So actually having cartridges that have the medium, which is, going to then be printed and extruded, but also molecularly grown to create food, and which is essentially what we're looking at is science fiction. And most science fiction that's been, in an innovation in itself in thinking, Star Trek, for example, the, computer, make me a croissant, right? And then all of a sudden it's made. Maybe we're not too far away from the possible,
like the Jetsons,
being able to do that. Well, the Jetsons too, if you have to say the Jetsons, but I prefer Star Trek, the original version. But it really is amazing how food and technology has started to interface in ways that are really science fiction.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, the nutrition density, it's kind of, you talk about the Jetsons and but what you're looking at is the nutrition density of the food you're eating as well, without having to consume, because the problem we're going to have from a global sense is, in order to feed the Earth's population, we've got to have enough to, calories and protein densities and nutritional value to consume all this. And there's a whole infrastructure out there that is set up right now that is set up to supply a certain type of food for people to consume, at least in the United States. And as we're talking about changing what we eat, we're also about changing the infrastructure that supports all that. So there's a lot of unknown to that as well, in terms of the types of crops being grown and the with even with the cellular technology, how to scale that up. So that'll be the thing that the future we have to decide. If we get more dense, we don't need as much in other words, not as many pounds or as much volume, but we can still get the same nutritional value from that. Then that will also help conserve our resources.
Yeah,
Right.
it really is. It's becoming, at least it's the practical aspects of making, nutrition adaptations within the construct of food is something that will help, hopefully, a lot of the environmental issues that are going into, right now, the processing of, for example, factory farming, right? So in a lot of, in large respect, that's kind of what the alternative protein show is. These innovators are looking at what's happening and how much equates to environmental concerns, but it's also going to impact our ability to bring nutrition on a larger scale and scope, to actually make it more nutritive, like you were saying,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is just fascinating
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit scary.
It's well, it is, but it's we're going to have to figure out ways to adapt, just as we always have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
So when would a company, a new startup, let's say, come to you? What would be, the right time for them to come to you and say, I want to look at, creating a manufacturing facility, and let me know the, steps I need to take?
yes, we get a lot of people that contact us through the internet and other and shows like the Alternative Protein Conference that are interested in trying to scale up or start up. Usually, and I always tell everyone that the first step is a lot of people have a great idea, but there also has to be a market force that they can sell through. And so, in other words, being able to understand how they're going to deliver their product. It's not only making the product, but how they're going to sell it and who they're going to sell it to. And I'm maybe taking a back step, but I'll work backwards here. But the grocery store shelves only have so much space on them, so you can only fit so much on the grocery store shelf. So if you're going to go put something on that shelf, you're probably taking somebody else off the shelf. Not that it isn't done all the time, but it's not something that's you just can't walk up to a major retailer and say, "Well, you'll sell my product for me."
Yeah, it's not easy to do.
No, it's not easy to do. So that's the first challenge. So I would say if they've got somebody that, and a lot of the smaller, well, I wouldn't say smaller retailers, but like the Whole Foods of the world have been very, very helpful for startups in order to get their product. And that's how a lot of these new products we see have grown, is because of the Whole Foods of the world have brought them in and exposed their products to the population. Beyond that, there's also the institutional world where you're selling to schools and hospitals and restaurants that you don't have to compete with store shelf space, but you got to compete with a buyer or somebody that wants to buy your product and put into a restaurant. So there's two different ways to do that. And you have to decide which consumer you want to do it, or which person you want to sell to or organization you want to sell to. But beyond that, then also look at the actual cost involved in scaling up, because it's not a inexpensive proposition to start up a food plant. It's not as much as say a hospital or a chemical plant or a lab, but it's a food facility by their nature are have to be cleaned. Imagine taking your house and inside and every time after the end of the day, after you got home from work and you or your kitchen, for instance, and just taking a hose and washing the whole thing down, scrubbing it 3 times, rinsing it off again, and then drying it out, and then starting all over day after day after day, and then keeping it at a cold environment of 50 degrees or 40 degrees or something like that. That's what these facilities have to undergo. So it's not inexpensive to build. So they have to understand the costs involved if they're going to come up and do that. So that's and also the size. The there's a certain size, and I'm going to, what the right square footage is, it's hard to say, but a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot facility, which would be equivalent to, say, two large homes, is kind of a beginning point, but that's still a very small plant in a small facility. So you're looking at a facility that would be like a small office building in order to start off with in terms of square footage.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, so, you mentioned Whole Foods and how that's helped sort of become a nurturing environment to entrepreneurs that want to get involved with food. And we've seen that as well on our side of branding and design. There's lots of companies that are new and they're trying to understand first that, they have a product that they're trying to create, they're trying to put out there, and they so badly want to share it with everyone. It's just that feeling that you get when you have something that's like a surprise and you want to share it and you want feedback. A lot of them, however, when they're doing that, are looking at perfecting what it is they have. That's their technology, so to say. But they're not taking into consideration the reality of the marketplace, which is competition. There's a billion peacocks out there. How can you, make yours different? And so as a branding and, design agency, that is like our objective, is to meet their needs, and accelerate the way in which they can move forward. Because without a story or without a foundation to pivot from, doesn't matter how great something is if it's not going to look correct, if it's not going to, it's not just to be beautified, but to actually be parsed and pulled into a story that makes sense to people, that's relatable, and that takes into consideration all of the competition that's out there.
Yeah, I think, well, and you probably know more than I do about this, but as an example of a branding, LaCroix been around for years and years and years. But when they changed their packaging and their look and feel, suddenly their sales took off. And that's an example of a very good product out there and some of that's the reaction of the market looking for other beverages besides the sugary soft drinks. But that I think is an example of how you can be perceived differently and then increase your sales.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like there's a tip of the iceberg, and if you don't make it, interesting enough, people are going to ignore it. There's a lot below that iceberg tip, and that's what you're trying to draw out. LaCroix really did have that moment where, wow, look at what happened when they actually took the time to consider what it is that they were lacking in terms of design.
Yeah, I think that I think the message to potential people who want to grow their product or their footprint and be able to sell it to people is that it's a lot of them are very innovative with the food itself, but you need help with the marketing and sales and how you're going to deliver that into the marketplace. Because I see a lot of people that have great ideas and they just can't get it to the next phase, next level.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah, we see that all the time. Brands come to us, they're really not sure about what next step to take and how to push their product out there. So, and that's something that we help them with.
It's interesting too because there will be different stages at which companies will need help. And one in particular I'm thinking of was a beverage that was competing against every energy drink in the world, of which there are so many. And they came to us to help them define their purpose. And when we integrated our solution to that, it has improved their sales tremendously, which is as equally gratifying for us as it is for them. In fact, sometimes a brand's vision doesn't come really until the revision. And it's great when we get to be involved in that. One of the most exciting things for a smaller company is when they get to that stage and they need to scale up in order to meet the demand. It's also one of the more vulnerable stages they can be at. But when they need to meet that demand and they need experts that will help with scaling up, it's really fascinating, interesting, kind of a hold your breath time. I think that a lot of the companies that are going to be at the Alternative Protein Show are probably going to be able to relate to this.
Yeah, and I think too, like when you're at the show, obviously it's going to be an opportunity for some of these companies to talk to you guys if they are curious about scaling up and what needs to be done to make that happen.
Very good.
We certainly look forward to meeting all of the companies there and you guys as well.
Are you all going to be there?
Yeah, we're both Emily and myself, Mark, are going to be there. Jennifer's not going to be able to make it, but we're looking forward to it and think it's a very. There's a lot of cool things going on every time we. Every day we seem to see something new and different.
I bet. In your field, I'm sure you see a lot of different. That's the one interesting thing too, is just that you work with so many different companies. The companies we talk to are very specific to what they do, but you get to see kind of the whole gamut of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting to be able to look at things from industry to industry and see how things relate but are separate, and it's kind of cool to see how they all overlap at some point.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even how the things we've seen and talked about is not only the manufacturing, but even on the on the delivery side in restaurants, you're seeing a trend towards, how do you automate the delivery of the food to, because you don't have the labor force anymore. So all kinds of really cool stuff out there. But at the same token, everybody still wants the food that's more home style and naturally made. So that's
right.
I think in the challenge in this industry is how do we produce it on a large enough scale for feeding the population, but keep it at a local level so that it still appears or it has the essence of being a home style type product. So
that is interesting. Yeah, that is quite a challenge, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's what would dispel the mythology that when you get to a certain scale that you lose control of what's so great about food in the first place. And so, I understand that it's really a practical consideration when you're going to scale up, that you have to have a professional help you to still make it taste and smell and feel like it's coming out of a place of love.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Excellent.
Terrific.
Well, it was so nice to meet you, Mark, Jen, Emily. We look forward to seeing you guys at the show.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You got it. This concludes our 4th episode. We're getting ready to go to San Francisco and see everyone there, after which we will be releasing the rest of the episodes of this podcast, so stay tuned. Really looking forward to seeing everyone there.
And one more thing, to learn more about food plant engineering, visit foodplantengineering.com. And to learn more about us, visit BrandFirstNJ.com. See you guys on the 16th.